as permitted uses in the R2, R3, R4, and SLR zones. Update definitions to correspond with the latest state definitions. It is incumbent upon the city to comply with state law. ZOA 19-004 brings the city into compliance with SB 234. The staff recommends that the City Council introduce read by title and waive further reading of the ordinance amending various sections of Chapter 90 zoning of the Hemet Municipal Code to update definitions of small and large family daycare homes and permit family daycare homes in residential zones based on the findings outlined therein, approving ZOA 19-004 as recommended by Planning Commission, and direct staff to file a notice of exemption with the county clerk. Staff is available to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, HP. With that, I'll now open the public hearing. Do we have any requests to speak on this item?
No, Mayor, there are no requests to speak.
Okay. I will then close the public hearing. Council, any questions or comments for staff?
Yes. Good presentation. I don't like mandates. How do you regulate something like this if someone wants to have one of these daycare centers in the senior community?
As long as the zoning allows for residential use, they can have a daycare.
Which means Four Seasons with senior people, Seven Hills with all senior people. If a resident in there or someone else bought a house and went in there, they could open a daycare center and destroy the lifestyle, basically, of everybody living around them.
I have the solution for that.
Okay, I've got a problem. You got the hammer to fix it, right?
Contact the HOA.
With CC&Rs or whatever they're called, HOA rules, trumped, excuse the expression, something like this?
I don't believe so. I'll pass it on to the city attorney's office.
Now, I know in the ADU legislation there was an express prohibition against HOAs doing that. I don't recall there being a prohibition in this law, but we'd have to go back and look at that.
And that's even a concern in multifamily housing or large apartment buildings that all of a sudden you've got up to, 14 or more children, young people. I just have a real problem with this, and I know it's a mandate from the state, but the state doesn't use their heads when they're thinking about people's lives. You can chime in now.
But they use their feelings.
Oh, yes, and you just hurt mine. So that's all. I just, got to complain when you have to complain.
So how do you really feel about state mandates?
Somebody else will pick that one.
Any other council members' questions or comments? Okay, if there are no further questions or comments, I'll entertain a motion.
I'll move that we approve this additional state mandate.
I have a motion to approve. Second by Carly.
Can I comment before we?
Yes.
When something bad happens, who's liable for this?
Well, we are.
Because my point is that we're making this we're passing an ordinance for the city because it's mandated by the state, licensed by the state. Is it still going to come back because we're the low man on the totem pole that we're going to get if something happens at one of these daycare centers because it's outrageously
Well, unfortunately, we know anybody can sue us for anything, but since we're not required, since we're limited to only a non-discretionary permit, we're exercising no discretion. We're not exercising actually any control over the thing. There would be some limitation on liability. Doesn't mean somebody couldn't sue us for it, though.
So does that mean that the state licensing agency would be the one that would be responsible if anything happened?
It really should be, yes, in this case.
Yep.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve. Please vote. And that passes 4-1.
I'd like
Okay.
to, Mayor, if I may, thank Scott Underwood for doing his magic on fixing the audio. So he's watching here somewhere. Thank you, Scott.
Thank you, appreciate that. And HP, thank you and your staff. There was a lot of work having to deal with state mandates and some difficult undertakings, so thank
And
you.
one additional thing, this ordinance also has the date of January 28th coming to council. So if that could be noticed someplace in that whole thing.
I also need to read the ordinance by title.
Yes.
An ordinance of the City Council of the City of Hemet amending various sections of Chapter 90 zoning of the Hemet Municipal Code to update the definitions for small and large family daycare homes and to permit small and large family daycare homes in all residential zones pursuant to state law.
Thank you, City Clerk. On to item 10A, action items. And we have our second quarter fiscal year 1920 update and mid-year review. Finance Director Lorena.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Tonight I'm here to present the second quarter financial update to the budget for fiscal year 1920, as well as the mid-year review. So not a lot of surprises here. On the general fund side, the non-Measure U revenues are on track for this time of year at just under 30%. Non-Measure U expenditures are also on track for this year at 47%. On the Measure U side, revenues are at 35%. This is slightly higher than last year's 28.5% at the end of the second quarter. And Measure U expenditures are at 33%. On the general fund side, property taxes are minimal, almost nothing, because through the end of December, we hadn't received any payments, and if we did, it was just delayed payments that had come in from the prior year. We'll start to see payments in the next quarter's report. Sales taxes collected are slightly lower than last year, and if you remember, there were several tax payments from the fiscal year 17-18 that were delayed due to new reporting software at the state level. So those payments came in 18-19. So we saw a little bit of an increase in 18-19. Now we're back to normal. So even though it's lower than last year, we're still on pace to meet our budget projections of $12 million for the year. Business license renewals, revenues are at 64%. This is normal for this time of year. All of our business licenses expire on December 31st. Renewals, the majority of them are paid in January. A lot of people, though, like to pay them ahead of time. So at the end of December, we already had 64% of them paid. By next quarter, you'll see another big jump in those payments. Non-tax related revenues. The library, again, received a literacy grant. We had projected $15,000. They were awarded $18,000 for the third year in a row, so it's increasing consistently. And on the community development side, revenues are on track at just under 47%. There are several new housing tracts that are being submitted for plan check, so we should start to see an increase in community development revenues in the near future once those tracts are approved. On the expenditure side, through the end of the second quarter, most of the departments are under budget in salaries. There are still several vacancies in the general fund departments that will continue to generate savings. Overall, the general fund expenditures are at 47%, a decrease from the prior year's 51% at the same time last year. On the Measure U side of expenditures, police expenditures are at 37% for the year. Contributing factors are continued vacancies, and there are equipment purchases and one-time projects such as the radio projects that have not been completed. Same thing for fire, expenditures are at 36%. Same contributing factors, they have one-time equipment purchases that have not been completed, as well as vacancies. For the non-general fund departments, revenues are outpacing expenditures in most funds. Lighting and landscape revenues are collected through tax bills, so we haven't seen really anything come in yet for that. The water fund has spent about 48% of its budget, and revenues are just over 47%. So on to the mid-year review. Usually after second quarter, what we like to do is take a look and compile anything that departments have come to us with that they're saying they're going to need to finish out the year. Something that was unforeseen, not something that can wait till the following year, but something that has to be taken care of in the current year. So with that in mind, the council approved budget for fiscal year 1920 was a balanced budget with several cost-saving measures implemented, as well as the use of one-time monies. Departments continue to monitor their budgets to ensure spending limits are met. So the items that I'm going to discuss now are the items that we have before you for consideration. In the city clerk's office, the city clerk's office will have higher than expected costs for codification of the municipal code due to building code updates. This is estimated to be a $3,000 increase, and the funding source would be the general fund's available fund balance. In community development, the building division relies on contract plan check services, and as a result of those additional housing tracts, as well as a hotel preparing to submit plans for review, additional plan check services are going to be needed. The important part of this is that plan check fee revenues will increase by the same amount to offset those expenditures. So anything that we contract out, that we send out plans to be checked, once they're done and we receive a bill, we're entitled to that revenue. So for this one, there is no increase to general fund because the expenditure side and the revenue side is being requested to be increased by the same amount. For the fire department, and just to clarify, this is the general fund side of the fire department budget. The fire department has exhausted its annual budget allocation for overtime. Based on the average monthly cost of overtime, it is estimated that the fire department will need an additional allocation to complete this fiscal year. And with that, at the last council meeting on January 28th, a financial model was presented to the council. At that time, council directed staff to incorporate the use of Measure U for mid-year adjustments. The estimated needed budget adjustment for fire overtime is $900,000. And based on those discussions, council has two options tonight for this item. Option one would be to fund the fire department overtime with Measure U fund balance. Option two would be to fund the fire department overtime with general fund's available fund balance. You'll want to keep in mind, if we use general fund available fund balance, this could jeopardize our 20% reserve. On the non-general fund side, lighting and landscape districts, there's three unforeseen items that came up. There's a need to replace some plants that were damaged by frost in the Rancho Diamante district. There is landscape maintenance for Warren Road north of Mustang in the Rancho Diamante district that was turned over to the city after the current budget was adopted. So additional funding is needed to pay the water bills related to that takeover. And then the last one is electrical wire was stolen from the street lights and the walkway lights within a large portion of the AP North Lake Solar District. The wire replacement will have to be contracted out as the work is extensive, and we just don't have the staffing to do it. It's important to note that for these, the lighting and landscape funds all maintain a reserve specifically set aside for unforeseen things such as this. So it's also used for, like, if a tree has to be replaced, if large areas of plants have to be replaced, anything like that. For the Public Safety Towing Fund, normally as part of the budget process, overtime budget is established within the Public Safety Towing Fund for various traffic operations. This allocation was missed during the process, so they do have the available fund balance to cover it. All we're asking is for authority to amend the budget so that they can move forward with their traffic operations. We do have a separate fund to pay unemployment benefits. The city has experienced higher than usual unemployment benefit claims in the current fiscal year. Again, fund balance is available to cover that. We're just asking for appropriation to cover it. And in Public Works Facility Maintenance, there is additional funding needed in the Facilities Maintenance Fund to cover the cost of a retired employee's payout. With full staffing in this division, there is not enough savings in any line item to really absorb something like that. We normally do set some money aside for payouts, but when you're fully staffed, it really limits what you have available. So all three funds have available fund balance. It's just asking for the appropriation as well. For the City Attorney Fund, due to ongoing litigation, the City Attorney budget is estimated to require an additional $800,000 to cover litigation costs through the end of the year. Normally what happens with our excess liability insurance is once a case is completed, anything in excess of our $250,000 is reimbursed to the city, but it doesn't happen until after it's completed. So at this time, the city has 3 pending reimbursements from its excess liability insurance carrier, but we still have to establish budget that gives us authority to spend the funds in the city attorney budget. Reimbursements will be deposited into an insurance reimbursement revenue account, so we can't just take the money and offset expenditures. We have to treat it as a revenue coming in. We would like to not specifically ask for budget to allocate out to all of the departments because we're waiting for those reimbursements. So what we would like to do is, for the City Attorney Fund, bring back this fund to council for approval of a true-up once we have all of our final year-end invoices, as well as the pending reimbursements are accounted for and received, so that we only charge the other funds the net deficit to the City Attorney Fund. This chart here was embedded in your staff report, and the reason we have it tonight here is because I want to make sure that everybody understands what we're looking at. So when I put it in there, I only put the line item that was affected. So for the city clerk, it was just a professional services line item, which had a total budget of $50,000. That's not the entire city clerk department or division's budget. It's just that line item. And same thing goes for all the others. So to give you an example, general fund the fire overtime, the original budget was $600,000. We're proposing to increase it by $900,000 for a proposed amended budget of $1,500,000. In comparison, when you look at this chart, this is the total department budget. So fire's budget, or everything, salaries, benefits, maintenance, and operations, everything, is $11.5 million, with a $900,000 increase would bring it to $12.4 million. So this gives you the difference between just the individual line item and then the department-wide budget. So tonight, council staff asks that council approve a resolution amending the fiscal year 2019-2020 budget. And as stated before, we're offering two different options. If the budget amendment is approved with option 1, where the fire department's overtime would be paid for with Measure U fund balance, the net impact to the general fund of all of the mid-year items tonight would be a net increase of $3,000, and that's just the item for the city clerk, because remember that the building departments was a net zero increase, and everything else was non-general fund. Option 2, if the budget amendment is approved with option 2 for fire department overtime, the net impact to the general fund would be an increase of $903,000 in expenditures, and again, this will jeopardize our 20% reserve. We're very, very close to that, and adding $903,000 to our expenditures could jeopardize it. So with that, if anybody has any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Okay, City Clerk, do we have any requests to speak on this agenda item?
No, Mayor, there are no requests to speak.
Okay, we'll bring it back to council. Questions, comments?
Thank you for the report.
Go ahead, Lonnie.
She already said thank you for the report. Yeah, I already said thank you for the report. You put it in really good perspectives, so thank you for that. I guess my question too is with regards to the fire overtime. Is that some of that cost part of being reimbursed too yet from other jurisdictions?
No, this is,
Okay.
years ago, we established, because there was so much confusion, we established an overtime account, specifically called mutual aid overtime. And so that gets its own allocation. I believe it's $350,000 for this year. And when firefighters are sent out to mutual aid calls, that's where they code their time. And then when we get the reimbursement, it goes into a respective revenue account to offset that. So this is above and beyond that.
Okay, so my question about this fire overtime, which is very high. How much of this overtime is because of vacancies? And can the vacancies be, the cost to fund, that's funding for those vacancies be used to offset this overtime? And my second question is how much of this overtime is for the Medic 2 unit or a medic unit that is being placed in service with the use of overtime?
So,
Let our fire chief answer that question.
and before we get started too, I wanted to add a couple things. One item, we are requesting an HR analyst position in the proposal for the mid-year adjustments, and that'll be split 50% police, 50% fire out of Measure U to help with recruitments, to help with any sort of follow-up with respect to items that come up in those public safety operations. It will be housed within HR. They will report to the HR division manager. The second item I do want to add for the council is if you look at the actual budget report and the actual mid-year budget report, that report is as of December 31st, 2019. So one of the conversations that I had with finance was, okay, well, what are we looking at in terms of January? What's hit payroll? What are we looking at for the overtime expenditures for the month of January? And what's it looking like for February? So what we were able to determine was that the overtime for the month of January was significantly higher than what it had been for the past 6 months. So one of the things that we had to do was provide our best guess as to what it's going to be moving forward. One of the things that the chief can comment on is we do have a number of vacancies, but part of what is driving some of the overtime that the chief can allude to is vacation, sick time, individuals that are on workers' compensation. Those individuals are replaced, or those shifts are replaced with additional personnel. So although the council only saw the December 31st roll-up of the budget, what we were looking at and what we've looked at to make the best guess for what we anticipate for the rest of the fiscal year is what is hitting for the month of January and February, and what do we anticipate that to be moving forward. So that allocation has been an estimate, what we guess, or what we estimate it to be moving forward. I should also add that part of what has happened in years past is the fire department historically for the last few years has gone over in their budget, total budget. And so what we've attempted to do, and the chief can allude to this, at the beginning of this fiscal year, we had conversations about what we anticipated that overtime to be for this fiscal year. Unfortunately, it's our best guess, our best estimate. We can't anticipate how many individuals take vacation, sick time, or how many people go out on workers' compensation. So obviously that estimate is our best guess, but it's subject to fluctuate and change. So with that being said, I think the chief has some more details that he'll be able to provide.
Thank you, Mr. City Manager, Mayor, and the council. Thank you for allowing me to go over some of this. We did an analysis from the beginning of this fiscal year, year to date, for the total, what are the total impact drivers for the overtime? 41% is accounted to OT for related to vacancies. Right now, we're in the process. We have 7 firefighter paramedic vacancies, 1 captain vacancy, and we also carried in the same time period 2 what we call light duty industrial leaves. As you know, we re-implemented the light duty policy. We bring personnel back into admin where they serve in that capacity until we can get them healthy and back into the field. So the vacancies have been a big driver. Those light duty assignments have been a driver of that. We continue to monitor that on a monthly basis. Our discretionary income, our discretionary overtime is virtually non-existent. So we have, as I've shared with you previously, tightened that down significantly. So unless it's tied to a funding source, unless there's an activity that benefits the department directly, I am denying every one of those that come to my office. To your question, Mr. Percival, with regard to the peak demand activities, this peak demand application has been limited. That's been limited for a number of reasons. Mainly, the labor group has refused to work that additional time. I'm working with our city leadership to work through that. It's an important strategy, along with our Medic One that we have, that you've approved and is funded, along with our EMD activities that are ongoing. I might add, for this fiscal year, we've had 14,659 EMS runs, 557 fires, total other calls 2,700. 81 to 82% of our issue, our challenge, our impact is EMS. So that's the strategy behind it. We continue to work very closely. Understand the overtime issue is an important issue, and we take that serious. I've had a number of discussions informally with our city leadership team on a number of policy-related issues that I'm sure at some point we'll bring forward for other considerations on how we can further reduce the impact of that overtime. Our focus now is to fill the positions. We have actively a firefighter paramedic recruitment in place now. I anticipate we'll be boarding those 6 firefighter paramedics once they get through their training in April. That'll eliminate the vacancies. I might say that to no fault of anyone's, we've been very, one of the items I believe the city manager will be bringing up in a minute is our HR capacity for both public safety departments. We've been working very diligently with supporting HR with their limited staffing, and that has caused somewhat of a delay in our 2 last recruitments. So we're working together the best we can with existing staff, but we have, I believe, I'll let Chris bring that forward to you, an opportunity that we can improve that. Vacancies are expensive, and we need to reduce that. They're funded positions. We realize the importance of filling that. And with that, I'll be open for any questions.
Thank you, Chief. Any more questions or comments from council?
Mayor, may I have one additional thing? Bonnie had a question on the reimbursable. For this last fiscal year, we were able to recover $501,000 of cost reimbursement associated for the other side of the equation. We've upped our administrative rate from 12 to 19%. So we are well above the baseline that we established. and have recovered a majority. We have the time lag that we got to deal with, but we've done really good, and I want to thank Lorena and her team for helping us with that, and we've made real solid progress. Thank you.
So I'll go back to my question is how much of that 900,000 can be offset with funded vacancies?
This goes back to the comment that I made earlier that, and I'll use an example. One of the things that we've done, or what we did over the last 3 years, is we looked, okay, let's see, with the vacancies being considered, how much of that can cover the overtime? And so we did that for the last 3 years, and we came to the conclusion that last year we had expensed about, correct me if I'm wrong, about 97%, 95% of our personnel vacancies in the fire department, but we were still over budget by $1 million. And so one of the challenges, and we went back a couple years before too, and the vacancy rate was a little bit higher than that, but it still didn't offset the overtime. And so what we're seeing is that although we have the vacancies, and although that there's a savings that's being accrued, we're still going over budget primarily with our overtime. And so yes, there will be a component of that will be covered by the vacancies. However, there is still a need to increase the overtime in the fire department.
So my next question, the overtime that these firefighters worked were for the benefit of the public's safety.
Absolutely. They're on the front line 24/7.
Okay, thank you.
I got to add to, yesterday we had a meeting with HFFA leadership and Chief and I, and, you know, we had the opportunity to talk about the budget, we talked about the financial model, we talked about the challenges that we have, and so in the spirit of being transparent and providing all the information to everybody that we can, you know, we provided that information, and we provided all the information that we talked about here to the labor group as well too, and so I think they are really receptive to the information. And they, you know, there was no ask. It was just, you know, here's the information. So I think there was a good dialogue related to some of the challenges and what we have to do moving forward to, you know, solidify the city's fiscal position moving forward.
I have a couple of comments, and I've said this before on previous similar discussions. Public safety departments are unique in the fact that when there's a vacancy, we don't have the luxury of leaving that position unfilled because, as Chief said, they're frontline personnel, and whereas maybe a non-public safety general fund position, if someone is on vacation or on sick, their work gets distributed among staff that are still there. They pick up, maybe they have a deeper in-basket exercise when they come back, but that's not necessarily to fill that spot. But on the front line public safety, it demands that we keep those spots filled. The other thing is the absolute unpredictability, even though you can look at historical service demands, the unpredictability in the nature of the work is their job responsibilities are the same every day, but every day is different. And you can completely explode your overtime budget with one major incident. So I think we need to keep in mind the difficulty, and I appreciate what you and Lorena and the Chief have done to look at not just the December 2019, but to try to do some educated forecasting, because that's real important to try to do that and translate it forward into what you anticipate your need to be. And I also know too that when you have vacancies of staff, there's salary savings, and salary savings can be reasonably applied to cover the overtime costs. But with salary savings, you know, overtime is not straight time. Overtime is something above that. So it's not a one-for-one even trade. But again, going back to my earlier comment, you still have to field the positions. we haven't really asked the question, but I'll just go ahead and offer my opinion on the two options that we have. Clearly, in my opinion, option one is the reasonable approach. And I say that going back to Council Resolution 4703, where we laid out in one of the sections of that resolution items that are public safety related. And clearly everything that we're talking about is public safety related. And I would even go so far as to say that the overlooked item on public safety towing, the operative phrase is public safety towing. So that $30,000, in my estimation, can reasonably be offset through Measure U general fund. So that's my 2.5 cents worth.
I have like 30 cents. I have many issues with many of the things on here. I'm not sure about the human resources having a 50-50 person, because right now we already have over 50% of our budget is for police and fire. So if we go in and say Gina is the 50-50 person and Public Works has a question, is she going to just, oh, I am a public safety person, not Public Works, sorry.
No, that,
Could really, like, this is getting into exactly what Mike and I have been talking about, and we're segregating our staff.
no, that's not how it would be. The only thing that we would have is the funding source is tied to Measure U versus being tied to general fund. What this ideally would do is free up the staff to be able to do the other things for the other respective departments and focus their attention on those other departments that aren't public safety.
So it's not going to be one person tied to this amount, it's going to be for the HR department.
Yes, it'll be for the HR division.
It's got to be.
Yes, and it's
very
very
clear.
It's very similar to the concept that we did with the IT position for public safety, where the position is funded through Measure U, but the idea behind that is that they're able to focus on the IT of public safety. The rest of the IT staff is able to focus on the rest of the operation.
I just don't want to see us getting a city within a city, you see what I mean?
No, they would report directly to the IT supervisor in the IT case, but in HR they would report directly to the HR manager.
And at rest, you said some nice things about overtime and things. But my question is, do they not have overtime in the police department? Do they not have vacations? Don't they have sick time and workers' comp injuries? And so we've got one department. Every year we have the same problem and the same conversation. The good part is we're not up to $1 million this year. It's only 900. But every year we sit up here and have this conversation over and over.
I think one of the things that is different with how we're doing things now, and you'll recall that when we started the budget for fiscal year 1920, I emphasized the fact that we were going to be real about our capacity, we're going to be real about what it is that we can accomplish, and we're going to get away from this rollover budget concept. And so for the most part, we've made some strides. So we increased the overtime budget in the fire department. We made some adjustments in the police department where we had to, where that funding hadn't been allocated before. But that was the first attempt. So obviously there's adjustments that still need to be made with the budget. So what I can commit to the council moving forward, and we've had preliminary conversations with the E-team, is really building these budgets from the ground up. This concept of you've been given nothing, you give me the justification for what you're putting in there. And so we didn't have enough time to do that last year, but this zero-based budget concept is really what we're driving moving forward. So I'm going to rely on my department heads and my division managers to provide information for me of what needs to be in the budget. But you're absolutely right that we need to be real, and we really need to be...
I mean, it's on YouTube. We can go back to all the meetings and look at our mid-year budget adjustments, and we have this conversation every single year. This year,
So what I can commit to the council is that moving forward with this budget, there are going to be those difficult decisions about if an allocation of X amount of dollars is allocated to this department, what that means moving forward. So that's what I can commit to the council moving forward. I know we talked briefly this morning about that. I wasn't here for many of those conversations previously, but that's what I can commit to the council today and moving forward.
I have one more question for the chief. You said that our firefighters are not working with you. And is that the case, or is it the fact that we started a program and we haven't had the council approve a new MOU yet for that?
Well, actually, Councilman Meyer, thank you for the question. Council did approve this. The peak demand activity was part of
The MOU is what I'm referring to.
No, the MOU has nothing to do with it. The peak demand activity was a funded, approved function, approved and identified in the standards of coverage and the deployment analysis. We brought it to you as part of the Measure U spending plan, and that was approved. First, the peak demand activity was approved. Secondary was the Medic 1 full-time staffing. So that was approved. Funding was approved. And in fact, at the workshop, I presented the vehicle replacement. We talked about those two increments as it related to allowing us to move forward on our truck. Cross-staffing model that we still have in place today was predicated on the approval of the recommendation of a medic unit and the part-time unit. Where we're working through some discussion is there is an interpretation on labor's side, if I may, that they simply do not view working 10 hours as something that they're willing to work with. And I hold that squarely on the labor leadership. We have a disagreement with that because on any given day we staff up not only a squad, we may staff up, for instance, a brush truck for 10 hours to fill a need. We may staff an engine for 4 hours to cover training. We need to maintain maximum flexibility to allow us to better manage what dedicated dollars we have for that. So the peak demand is unique in that. And so when I reference there is a definite disagreement, the amount of overtime that an individual work is not governed by the MOU. Their schedule is. They're on a 4896.
I'm talking about the medic unit.
The medic unit is treated
But
as
I'm
an
just
overtime.
concerned because
Yeah.
you said that
Yeah.
they're not working with you, so are they not coming to work, or?
No, I make this comment, this is what the union leadership, we have some work to do. Chris and I are working towards having that continued dialogue. That started yesterday, and it's important that, that you hear from your fire chief that this is, we're carrying out your direction, what the council approved as part of our Measure U plan. It is absolutely critical. EMD, addressing the full-time medic squad.
We've been talking about EMD for like 4 years, so don't get me started on that. Okay.
Thank you.
That's what I need to know.
And if I could, Mayor, add a couple comments on that. I think one of the things that you're referencing is whenever council provides some sort of policy direction on what the council would like to see, one of the things that we always have to remember is that labor is a direct component of how to execute that. And so I made it very clear to the HFA leadership yesterday that as far as I'm concerned, they are a key component of whatever we have to do, whether it's fire response, emergency medical response, whatever it is. They're a key component of it, and I think they provide some of the best services in all of the state of California. And so with that being said, I think it's absolutely critical that they continue being a part of the solution. They continue to provide input, and we continue listening to our employees because our employees are the ones that essentially carry out what it is that we want in terms of goals for the city. So I think you've hit on a very important concept that labor is a critical component of the discussion, and they need to be involved in those conversations because it does impact them. And in instances where we do need to update MOUs or enter into some of those conversations, then obviously those are the conversations we'll have, in closed session as it relates to what we need to do to move forward.
I have a question, Chief. So the whole idea of peak demand, would you just convey that to the public and why you felt peak demand was so important, staffing for that?
I will, thank you. The concept of peak demand, fire departments traditionally staff for what might happen. We've taken, it was a mandate that was given by this council to me when I took over as your fire chief. Status quo, no go. I hate to bring it up, but that's always the overarching. And I needed to develop a business model that took into account, we have very finite budget that we've got to work with. And so we need to be really creative on how we apply that. The industry standard is evolving to peak demand, staff to what your known demand is. And in our city, from Monday through Thursday, from about 8 o'clock to 6 to 8 o'clock at night is our demand curve. It goes back 5 years. We've had 2 professional studies that have been conducted, independent, and validated that. I provided that to the council for guidance, and they supported that concept. I'm a strong supporter. In our industry, one of our problems is the very issue we're talking about. 24-hour shifts are a good concept, but when you need to address additional capacity, we need to be a little smarter on how we spend what limited dollars we have. Peak demand is not new. Peak demand is a good, solid business decision, and most progressive departments, EMS response agencies, are doing this. And as I committed as your fire chief for the city that we were going to be innovative, we're going to be creative, and we're going to take those types of steps. So that's what peak demand is about. It's a good, solid business decision, and it has made a significant difference positively on reducing the impact on our frontline engine companies. And that's the other balance. And they're responding as a 2-person squad, not bringing the engine on every call. And that was, thank you to the council for that support. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, it did. Well, it gave an explanation to the public, too, as well, as to why it was even thought to be implemented. And so I guess I'm a little, I'm not clear on why there would be an objection to that 10-hour, per se, overtime to any other 10-hour overtime. I mean, what the heck is the difference?
Well, I'm going to be very sensitive in the spirit of we're working with our labor group to try to educate. Well, the traditional staffing model is 24 hours. We have 17 seats that we fill every day. That represents each one of your 5 stations, your frontline engine companies. So when somebody is sick, injured, or goes off, we have to fill that seat. We have what we call 3-0 staffing, 3 people on each engine company. That is adequate. No fire chief would argue I need more. We do with what we've been allocated, and so we need any additional. This is where things like peak demand are very important. And I know Carly doesn't like it when I bring it up, but EMD, which we are continuing, it is a priority, and we now have adjusted that to the June prior. And the facts are, and our police chief is here to talk about it, is that we've had a tremendous challenge with dispatchers. We just had another dispatcher resign. And in order for us to do that, we need an adequate force structure in dispatch. Reducing capacity, doing it different, being smarter with the tax dollars that we've been given is the mandate you have given me and my commitment, and continues to be as we try to move the fire department into the 21st century. Thank you.
Thank you, and I apologize if I brought up something I shouldn't have because of negotiations at this time.
Linda? I'm good. You're good. Okay. And just for clarification, when I was referring to the fact that we have to fill public safety, I wasn't just focusing on fire. I was talking police, fire, dispatchers. They're all frontline 24/7 positions that, for all intents and purposes, if there's a vacancy, it has to be filled. So that was the only point in my comment. Okay, are there any more questions?
Are we going to talk about the attorney fees?
It's up to you.
Well, we're going for $2,250,000 for this fiscal year. So we're going to increase it. It was 1.5 last year. At least that was our budgeted amount. I think we went over.
So one of the things that I should add on this is that the way that our excess insurer is set up is that we have to front all the money on the front side for litigation expenses, and primarily for the Toussaint case in this instance. And so we have to front that money on the front side. CSAC, our excess insurer, will then reimburse the city in certain allotments. So they are in the process of reimbursing the city what we've paid. So what is included in the staff report is that, yes, we are in the process of getting reimbursed, but we don't know how much money we're going to need to essentially increase the budget by. We'll need to bring that back to council, but I think that's one of the challenges that we have, that CSAC essentially bills us on the front side, we've got to cover it, and then they reimburse us. So that's just on the budgetary side. That creates some challenges for the city on the budgeting side. I should note that in the last discussion, JPIA mentioned that once the city were to reach its SIR, the city wouldn't be dishing out additional payments for any sort of litigation costs for attorneys. So that's one of the key differences between CSAC and JPIA. In the instance that we have right now, going through litigation, we're having to cover it on the front side. It's very expensive, but we'll get a portion of that reimbursed in the near term, and we're working on that right now.
So there's really no guarantee that you won't be back with another budget adjustment increasing it.
That's correct.
And we have here written down reimbursements pending for the funding source, but that may not be the case either. So if we vote for this tonight, then we're voting to give another $800,000.
We won't know what the exact dollar amount is until we start getting reimbursements back from CSAC.
And we still don't want to do anything different? What's the choice? We have litigation. We have people that are suing us right and left because they think we have deep pockets. When someone sues us, we have to respond. That means attorney fees, litigation fees. What's our choice? What's our alternative? Well, I think we need to change up what we're doing, and we haven't done that in years and years. And so we establish routes and we establish routines that need to be changed, refreshed, and broken. And our litigation and our lawsuits against us continue and increase. And that's my point. How do we get the people to stop suing us? There is no mitigation. We're not doing risk management. That's my point. So we need to change what we're doing, and we're not willing to do that. I mean, do I need to put that to a vote again? Like, we can put it to a vote again.
Also like to point out that our insurance costs are going up because of the fact that we keep getting sued and having to pay out.
So one of the things, if I could respond to a couple of the comments, is we are doing the best that we can with risk management. However, we have no employee that specifically is tasked with doing that. So the conversations that we've had with our TPA, as well as with legal, as well as with finance, as well as with public works, engineering, is really looking at the claims that we have, what are the patterns that are happening, and what can we do on our side to maybe prevent some of the litigation in the future. However, we don't have one point person that does that. As I mentioned before, the budgetary constraints that we have on the city don't allow us to add additional staffing to cover that for the city of Hemet.
Well, and if I may, to Carly's point, we have expressed over and over again, not we, but just collectively, and you've said it yourself, that when you do not have a risk management manager, it's an issue. Now, we're caught between a rock and a hard place because of our budget issues. So, but what I would like to see is that a plan moving forward as to what we will implement at which time we can, for the reasons that we stated, and the fact that how important it is. So, I think that I agree with Carly on that. We've talked about it. Now, how soon we can implement is another story, but I would like to see us move in that direction and at least have the plan, an idea of when that plan could be implemented.
Couple comments, if I may, on that. I think we had the beginnings of a starting point when we had the presentation by CSAC and JPIA. There's an option to look at a different model and a different way of doing it. And if I recall, I think both of those were offering risk management training for staff and risk management services. So, I mean, that could be...
Last meeting, I'm sorry. That's the meeting I missed. I'm sorry. Okay.
So I think that, looking at an alternative, we got a taste of it. They're going to be coming back, and we'll be having an opportunity to make a decision on which way to go. And I think risk management is critical to looking at litigation. We, just like the service demand on public safety, we really don't have any control over what people decide to do to sue the city,
Right.
except for trying to be as proactive through risk management, looking at your historical picture and finding out, well, what kinds of things and are there preventable things that we can do on the front side that doesn't ever completely do away with the
No, it
litigation
certainly helps.
potential, but it can certainly lower
And I
the
apologize,
potential.
like I said, because
That's okay.
one
You-
meeting I really should have been at,
Yeah.
I wasn't there. The only one I missed.
There's a lot of stuff that happens when you're gone.
Yeah, I guess.
I would like to add that, if I recall from the presentation last week, or the last council meeting, is that the JPIA provides risk management as part of the coverage.
Yeah.
At no additional cost.
They'll assist with identifying the potential risks and making sure that the city's doing things to ensure that it's minimizing that, because it's in their best interest to do that because of less exposure.
And if I may, last week, or last council meeting when they were here, Renetta, who works for Alliant, I talked to her after the council meeting. We already have a meeting established for next week to work on some of that stuff. There's a lot of free training that we can take advantage of, both for our side, because risk management is kind of under finance, but things that we can do different, things that we can help train our employees to do different, things to look out for. And so we do have that scheduled for next Thursday.
That's great.
Yeah, I think employee and volunteer awareness is critical to that, because if you train people on what to look for, simple thing like you've got volunteers working for the police department driving around, if they see a stop sign that's obscured by a tree, that's a risk management issue that can be addressed. They have a reporting mechanism in place,
right.
and it gets handled. So getting the risk management mindset infused into every city representative and getting them to be proactive is a very important first step.
Right.
Okay. Any more comments on this agenda item? There's a lot of things, a lot of moving parts to this agenda item. Okay, if there are no more comments, the recommendation is two-part: receive and file the second quarter budget report. And the second recommendation is to adopt a resolution amending the budget and approving appropriations for fiscal year 2019 and 20.
Well, and which option?
And which option? Would you want to take this as a recommendation in one motion, or you want to break it apart?
Break it apart?
Okay. So let's take the first part, to receive and
All right,
file.
I'll move that we receive and file this.
Second.
Okay. Please vote. Okay, that passes unanimously. Now, the second part is adopt a resolution amending the budget and approving appropriations for fiscal year 2019 and 20. Do we want to make a third motion to deal with just the option, or do you want to incorporate an option into that? Is that part two? Okay.
I'll make that motion.
Okay, so I have a motion
To adopt.
by Linda to adopt the resolution.
Right. Choosing
And
option A.
Option one,
One.
with option one. Okay, is there a second?
I'll second.
A second by Bonnie. Please vote. Oops. There we go. And that passes 3-2. Okay.
Council?
Thank you, Lorena. Appreciate that. Thank you, Chief. Okay, moving on to item 10B. 10B is, if you will indulge me on this, this is actually an agenda item that I asked to bring to council. And we heard some of the background from representatives of our American Legion Post 53 at